All right, let's dive deep into these conversations with, well, let's face it, two pretty fascinating guys. Donald Trump and Elon Musk. We're talking full Joe Rogan Experience here, not just sound bites.
Yeah, those long-form interviews can be really revealing. It's interesting, right? You get so much more context than the usual quick clips.
Yeah, exactly. I'm all about getting past those headlines, you know? Today, we're going to unpack their leadership styles and their personal philosophies, and, maybe even some of those weird little stories they tell that really make you think, like, Trump talking about, get this, like a real emotional connection to the Lincoln bedroom, and Elon Musk and his thoughts on, like, who's really running the Biden administration.
Yeah, I think that's what makes these deep dives so interesting. It's those unexpected, like, human elements you don't always get to see.
Totally. Okay, so let's rewind back to Trump's transition into the presidency. He talks about, like, that moment of driving down Pennsylvania Avenue and walking into the White House for the very first time. He describes it as, like, this almost out-of-body experience.
I can't even imagine.
Right. Like, could you imagine going from businessman to, like, the most powerful guy in the world, just like this?
And with, like, no real political experience beforehand, right?
Exactly. He talks about having to appoint, like, 10,000 people. Like, how do you even wrap your head around that?
Seriously. And having to rely on, like, recommendations from people he barely knew.
Right.
Makes you wonder how much that shaped his presidency. Like those early decisions, the people he surrounded himself with.
Totally. Oh, and then there's that story about him visiting the Lincoln bedroom. I mean, who knew Trump would have this, like, thing for Lincoln? He describes the room as just beautiful, not at all what he expected. And he talks about how being there sparked this, like, emotional connection to Lincoln's story, especially his struggles.
That's where you see, like, that human side coming through, right?
Yeah.
It's so easy to forget that these figures we see on TV, they're real people too, with anxieties.
He even, like, connects Lincoln's struggles with the impeachment stuff he was already dealing with before he even took office.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's intense.
Right. Like, can you imagine that pressure? I mean, constant scrutiny, having to make decisions that impact millions. It's got to take a toll on anyone. Okay, but let's switch gears a bit. Let's talk about Trump's communication style. You know, his whole weave technique, where he jumps between topics and stories and policies, almost like a stream of consciousness, I guess.
Oh, yeah, the weave.
Yeah.
It's definitely not your typical polished political speech, that's for sure.
Right. It's fascinating, right? Like, it does create that sense of authenticity. Like, he's just speaking his mind, no filter. But I guess the question is, was it effective?
Well, he did draw massive crowds. And he resonated with a lot of people.
Yeah, but did it actually build trust, or did it just create more confusion and division?
That's a really good question. I mean, in today's world, with all the information overload and social media, it's harder than ever to know what's real and what's not.
Totally. It's like we all need to be media detectives now, constantly questioning things, verifying, trying to find different perspectives.
Absolutely.
And, Trump and Musk both, they share this, like, deep distrust of the mainstream media.
Oh, yeah, for sure. They both constantly talk about feeling misrepresented, like they're being targeted.
But is there any truth to that? Or are they just playing the victim?
It's tricky, right? I mean, media bias definitely exists. Every outlet has its own perspective. But you also got to consider, are they just rejecting anything that doesn't fit their own narrative?
Good point. It's like, how Musk talks about how the media's focus on his, like, wild stuff actually helped Trump's campaign because it gave Trump this platform and appealed to voters who were tired of the usual political talk.
Oh, that's interesting. It really shows how much distrust there is in traditional institutions and how that can impact, like, who people vote for.
Absolutely. And this distrust, it ties into their shared concern over censorship, too, especially on social media. They both seem to be huge advocates for free speech, even when it gets controversial.
Yeah, but that's where things get really tricky.
Yeah.
It's all about balance, right? How do you protect free speech while also making sure people aren't spreading misinformation or hate speech?
Exactly. And then there's the whole issue of algorithms, right? Like, we're not always getting a neutral view of the world online.
Nope. We're being fed information based on what these algorithms think we want to see. And that can create these, like echo chambers where we're only exposed to ideas we already agree with.
It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. You see what you want to see, and it just reinforces your existing beliefs.
Exactly. So it's more important than ever to be aware of those biases
Yeah.
and actively seek out different perspectives.
Totally. We can't just passively consume information anymore. We have to be active participants in shaping our own understanding of the world. And it's interesting how that distrust of the mainstream, connects to their shared belief in personal freedom, like limited government, almost a libertarian streak in both of them.
Yeah, totally. They both definitely seem to advocate for less government interference, whether it's in business or personal choices, or even speech, like we were talking about.
Exactly. But, that hands-off approach can have downsides too, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And we see those different views play out in some of their policy critiques, Like Trump, he's so vocal about immigration and border security.
Yeah. He always talks about how undocumented immigrants pose a danger, right? And he criticizes those politicians who support open borders.
Yeah. And it's such a complex issue. I mean, there are definitely valid points on both sides, right? You've got concerns about national security, the strain on social services, but then you also have people arguing that immigrants actually contribute a lot to the economy and the culture.
Right. And Musk, he's not really as focused on those social issues, but he is super critical of government overreach and all that bureaucracy.
Oh, yeah. He's always using SpaceX as an example.
Yeah.
Talking about how all those regulations stifle innovation.
Exactly. And who hasn't been frustrated with bureaucracy at some point? Right?
Totally. But the question is, where do we draw the line? Regulations, even though they can be annoying, they often have a purpose, like protecting consumers or the environment.
Yeah, it's about finding that balance, right, between individual freedom and the good of society, innovation and regulation.
Exactly. And I think their concerns, they do resonate with a lot of people who feel like the system's rigged against them.
Speaking of rigged systems, we can't ignore the whole 2020 election thing. With Trump, he is completely convinced it was stolen.
Right. And it's important here to separate allegations from actual evidence. Trump and his supporters, they did make a lot of legal challenges, but none of them were successful in overturning the results.
And there were all those investigations by his own attorney general, right?
Exactly. And they didn't find any widespread fraud that would have changed the outcome, but he still keeps talking about it. And that just keeps those conspiracy theories going.
Totally. And it just erodes trust in the whole democratic process.
Right. Whether you agree with the outcome or not, questioning the legitimacy of our elections is super dangerous.
Yeah.
It creates this breeding ground for misinformation and even extremism.
Yeah, no kidding. Okay, so on the other side of things, we have Elon Musk making some pretty bold claims about the Biden administration. He suggests that Biden isn't really in control.
Yeah, that's a tough one to back up. The vice president always plays a big role. But to say that, Kamala Harris is secretly running the show, that's mostly speculation.
He even calls Biden a fake president. Come on.
And he claims that no one actually supports Harris. A Harris presidency would be a disaster.
Again, it's important to remember those are just Musk's opinions. We can't just take them as facts. And we have to be careful not to dismiss an entire administration or person based on, just speculation. Okay, well, how about we take a break from all this serious stuff for a minute? Let's talk about some of those lighter moments from the interviews. After all, these are real people, not just politicians, right?
Yeah, I agree. It's those little, human moments that make these deep dives so interesting.
Okay, you gotta hear this. Trump tells this story about playing golf with Bryson DeChambeau right after being shot.
Wait, what?
I know, right? Talk about competitive spirit. The guy's unbelievable.
It definitely shows his resilience.
Yeah.
And maybe a bit of bravado.
Maybe a lot. But it's a good reminder that even in those high stakes situations, there's still room for, a little bit of fun and those human connections. And then there's Musk. He jokes about this possibility of a Tesla phone.
Oh, wouldn't that be something?
Right. But he says they could do it, but they don't necessarily want to. He even talks about how he keeps trying to get away from Apple's walled garden, but he always gets sucked back in because of features like FaceTime.
I think we've all been there. It's that convenience is so tempting, even for someone like Elon Musk.
It's a good point, right? We all make those choices about the technology we use, and those choices have real consequences for our privacy, our freedom.
Absolutely. And even for our relationships, how we connect with each other.
Oh, and he also had some funny things to say about Mark Cuban's whole transition into politics. He joked about him stealing Rachel Maddow's glasses.
It's always good to have a little humor mixed in with all this serious stuff.
Totally. It reminds us that, even these larger-than-life figures, they have a sense of humor. It makes them seem a little more relatable, a little less intimidating. So we've talked about their separate views, but it's really interesting to see where their ideas like kind of overlap and even clash. You have Trump, right? Businessman turned politician, all about restoring America's strength. And then you've got Musk, the tech guy, looking way ahead, talking about colonizing Mars, changing the whole energy game.
It's wild, right? Like, they're tackling the same problems, but from totally opposite directions. They both see the system as broken, government, the media, even globalization. But their solutions, totally different worlds.
Yeah, it's like Trump's stuck in the past, wants to bring back those factory jobs, Project American Power all over the world, like going back to this idea of national pride, like we lost something along the way.
And Musk is all about pushing forward. Tech, innovation, solving these global problems. He's not looking back, he's looking ahead, like he's in a race or something.
It's really obvious in their views on immigration, too. Trump sees it as like a danger, border security, jobs, the economy, all that.
And Musk, he knows we need those skilled workers, right? Especially in tech. But he also worries about, resources, and whether society can handle it with the population growing so fast.
It just shows how messy this issue really is. No easy answers. Both sides have points.
Right. It's about that balance again, welcoming people but also protecting our own.
And that balancing act, it comes up with climate change, too. Trump, he's not really sure how serious it is, but Musk, he's saying it's like an existential threat. Like, we got to act now or else. He's putting tons of money into clean energy, wants to ditch those fossil fuels for good.
It's almost like they're living on different planets. Trump's all about the economy and energy, like right now. Musk's worried about the future, the consequences if we don't do anything.
It's a big split, right? Not just in America, but everywhere. How do we grow without trashing the planet? Tough questions we all got to be asking.
Absolutely. And it makes you think about those trade-offs, What are we willing to sacrifice now to have a better future later?
Okay, but maybe the biggest difference is just how they lead. Trump's all instinct, charisma, breaking the rules. He's like the ultimate disruptor, just shakes everything up.
And Musk is more like a data guy. Logic, innovation. He takes risks, but it's always calculated. He's got a plan.
Two very different ways to run things, right? Trump, he taps into emotions, that sense of nostalgia. Musk is all about logic and progress.
And both ways have pros and cons, right? Trump, he can be exciting, but also dangerous. And Musk, sometimes he seems like he's missing that human connection,
It's really fascinating to see how they're both shaping the world in totally different ways. But at the end of the day, it's up to us to decide what we believe in, what matters to us, what kind of future we want.
Exactly. We got to be informed, engaged, question our own assumptions even. Listen to different points of view, even if we don't like them.
It's been a wild ride, exploring the minds of these two guys, Trump and Musk. They're both super complicated, and they're definitely shaking things up. It's up to us to figure out what it all means.
Absolutely. And that means having these conversations, challenging ourselves,
Yeah.
and staying open to learning. So keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.